Alien Beastwoman cultist says my DNA matches her prophecy, then offers her womb to the stars. Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Kurt hadn't been a crash near a floating cult temple orbiting a dead gas giant. The plan had been a simple one. Slip past a few minor patrol routes, scan an uncharted relic belt, and sell the coordinates to the highest bidder. Nothing religious, nothing insane, but fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. His ship, the Antler, clipped an unseen gravity snag on entry, dragging him sideways through a cloud of charged space debris. By the time he got partial control back, one of the thrusters was spitting fire and his comms were fried. The only landing spot within range was a hovering monolithic structure glowing faintly violet, perched above shimmering clouds of ionized dust. No other options. He angled down and braced for impact. He woke to the sound of chanting and the smell of burned herbs. He'd been dragged into a cathedral chamber that pulsed with energy, lit by relics embedded in the walls like veins of light in stone. Figures in ceremonial garb surrounded him. All were tall, furred, and unmistakably alien. At first he thought his injuries had rattled his brain until one of them stepped forward, the air seeming to bend slightly around her as if she carried her own gravity. She was massive, not just tall, but powerful in a way that commanded respect. Broad shoulders under a sheer lace veil woven with strands that shimmered like starlight, glowing bone jewelry clinking as she moved. Her eyes were twin orbs of teal fire, and her fur rippled like a night sky under moonlight. "You bear the scent," she murmured, sniffing him like a predator circling prey. The prophecy breathes again. Kurt blinked. "Lady, I don't know what you think I am, but I promise you I'm not it." She circled him slowly, ignoring the murmurs of the other cultists. Her fingers tipped and glinting claws tapped rhythmically on the relic altar behind him. "You are human, the seed-bearers, lost in time but foretold to return. You fell to us from the stars carrying the spark." She crouched down, nose barely an inch from his neck, inhaled deeply, then knelt in front of him. The gesture was not submission, it was declaration. "You belong to the stars and now to me." Kurt tried to move, but his arms were bound with soft, humming restraints made of floating silver threads. A low buzzing hum echoed through the floor. The air crackled. One of the relics on the wall brightened at her words, pooling in sync with her breath. His heart thudded against his chest. He wasn't religious. He didn't believe in destiny. He didn't even believe in luck. But that relic didn't care what he believed. It was reacting to something in him, something buried or dormant, and that terrified him more than any gun ever had. "Let's slow this down," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "You've got me tied up. I'm unarmed and I don't even know what the hell a spark is. I'm just a cargo pilot. I haul junk for credits. You've got the wrong guy." The Beastwoman Bailey, as he'd hear her called later, rose to her full height. Her horns formed a halo over her head, catching the purple glow from the ceiling relics. "The relics do not err. They awaken only for the one whose blood confused with the vessel. You are chosen. The rest is noise." He tugged against the restraints again and scowled. "Great. Chosen. Do I get a say in any of this, or are we just skipping straight to the sacrifice part?" There was laughter from the cultists, strange and resonant, like wind chimes underwater. Bailey stepped close and reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek with surprising gentleness. "Not sacrifice. Union. The fusion of your blood with mine will awaken the core. The monastery will bloom. Our people will ascend." "Okay, that's enough crazy for one day," Kurt snapped, trying to wriggle backward. "Listen, this is all really poetic, but I'm not here to bloom anyone's monastery." Her hand didn't leave his face. "You fear what you do not understand. That is natural, but the stars do not wait for permission. They act, so must we." Before he could argue, the relic behind him flared with sudden heat. The restraints dissolved. He stumbled forward, catching himself on the altar. Bailey didn't react. She simply raised her arms, and the room filled with low, harmonic humming. Every cultist dropped to their knees. The floating spine cloak on her back pulsed like it had a heartbeat of its own. "The rite begins," she announced, voice echoing unnaturally. "He has arrived. The womb of the stars calls. Let him stand witness and see the truth." Kurt stood still, muscles tense as the air grew thick, not with smoke or heat but meaning. The relics flickered in a cascading pattern, forming a spiral of symbols he'd seen once before, years ago in a black market archive. The ancient glyphs weren't just religious nonsense, they were instructions, biocoding, something old and powerful, buried deep in forgotten galactic history, something real. This wasn't just a cult playing pretend. Bailey turned to him again, her expression unreadable. "You will see in time. We do not bind the unwilling, but we are patient. You will stay, observe, and when the truth finally breaks through your human doubt, then we will begin." Then, as if the whole spectacle had never happened, the relics dimmed. The others dispersed. Only Bailey remained, watching him as he stood frozen in place. Kurt didn't speak. He didn't try to escape again. For the first time in a long while, he didn't know what move to make. And that scared him more than anything. Kurt paced the length of the glowing corridor, boots thudding against polished obsidian tiles that shimmered beneath his feet like starlight trapped in stone. The restraints had been removed. Bailey had kept her word on that much, but the freedom was an illusion. The monastery floated in deep orbit, far beyond reachable systems, shrouded by thick clouds of magnetic dust, and laced with defensive wards he couldn't even begin to understand. There were no visible hangars, no windows leading to ships, and even if he found one, his vessel was totaled. He was effectively a guest, or a captive, depending on who was watching. The air in the corridor pulsed with low vibrations, relic-powered energy systems humming just beneath the surface of every wall and corner. Kurt kept moving. Not because he had a destination, but because stillness meant thinking. And thinking meant grappling with the insane possibility that something in him had triggered ancient alien technology. He hated the idea of destiny. He hated the idea of being special even more. He rounded a corner and found Bailey waiting for him. No guards, no entourage, just her arms folded behind her back, standing like a sentry in front of a door carved with more of those strange symbols. Her expression was unreadable, but her stance radiated calm authority. "You've avoided the chambers I prepared for you," she said evenly. "You would rather pace in circles like a nervous animal." "I think hostage fits better than guest," Kurt muttered, though he stopped a few steps away. "And forgive me if I'm not in the mood for ceremonial pampering after being sniffed and told my DNA is cosmic gold." She didn't smile. "You are no hostage. You are free to explore, but this is not your world. There is little here that obeys the logic you trust. We do not coerce the vessel. We reveal. You will see in time." He rubbed a hand down his face. "Stop calling me that. Vessel, seed-bearer, spark. I'm not an ancient code. I'm a man who fell out of the sky. Whatever you're expecting me to do, you've got the wrong guy." Bailey stepped aside and gestured toward the door. "Then let truth show you what I cannot explain." Kurt hesitated, but curiosity clawed at him harder than fear. He stepped past her, and the door slid open with a silent whisper. The room inside was dark at first, then lit gradually with a soft white glow from the floor. In the center stood a massive crystalline console, its panels hovering weightlessly in a circular arrangement. He stepped closer and the panels reacted, rearranging, pooling, shifting through patterns that felt familiar, even though he knew he never seen them before. Instinct moved his hands. He tapped a sequence and the glyph stilled. A holographic projection flared to life in front of him. He staggered back. The image showed a star map, then a sequence of symbols overlaying various species across the galaxy, each one marked with lines of genetic code. Then came the humans, highlighted, central, pooling. The projection zoomed in on a silhouette clearly human and showed something terrifying, a branching evolutionary map leading to a hybrid species, Baileys. They were designed spliced, evolved, guided. The prophecy wasn't religious at all. It was a relic of ancient bioengineering. Bailey's voice behind him was quiet. We were made as tools created in shadow, bred for strength, obedience, and silence. When the war that birthed us ended, our creators vanished. We were left behind, hollow, lost, until one among us uncovered the fragments of the ascension algorithm, what you call prophecy. It was never divine. It was code, waiting for completion, waiting for you. Kurt turned to her slowly, the blood in his veins gone cold. So this wasn't some star-washed vision. You were literally built with a backdoor code tied to human DNA. She nodded, yes, and yet none who came before matched. Many claimed it. Some tried to fake it. All failed until now. And you believe that because I matched the code, we're meant to what? Fuse. Save your species. You seriously think the universe wrote a love story between a cargo pilot and a genetically orphaned warrior monk? Bailey's expression didn't waver. I believe that meaning emerges from chaos. That hope can be born from desperation. Whether you are the culmination of ancient design or simply the first to stumble upon the match by accident, does it matter? The truth is, you are the match. The relics do not lie. You lit the spark. Kurt stared at the console, the weight of the projection settling on his shoulders like armor made of gravity. He didn't want this. He didn't want to be a piece of some long-dead species puzzle, but he also couldn't ignore what he'd seen. The relics weren't wrong. He'd interacted with them without hesitation. The map wasn't metaphor. It was science. Messy, terrifying science. And Bailey, despite her beast-like appearance, despite her zealotry, wasn't lying. She believed every word, and maybe, deep down, she wasn't wrong. So what now? He asked bitterly. You expect me to stay here and play out some ancient script while the rest of the galaxy spins on? She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her body through the ceremonial mesh of her cloak. I expect nothing. You are free to leave if you find a way, but the relics will not open for just anyone. The monastery listens to you now. You are tied to it. To us. To you. Kurt said quietly, the words slipping before he could stop them. Bailey blinked just once. Yes, she said, to me. The silence between them stretched, heavy with unspoken things, fear, longing, doubt, inevitability. Kurt finally turned away and faced the projection again. Then we start with this, he muttered. No rituals, no altars, just data. Let's decode what this system actually wants from us. Bailey inclined her head, agreed. As she left him alone in the chamber, the projection continued cycling through genetic strands and celestial coordinates. Kurt's mind raced. Whatever he was part of it had already begun. He couldn't stop it now. But maybe, just maybe, he could choose how the story ended. Kurt spent the next 2 days buried in relic interfaces, running his hands over alien controls that adjusted to his touch with eerie precision. The chamber became his orbit, a space where he could lose himself in lines of code and layers of design that defied everything he'd ever learned in flight school or black market tech hubs. Every time he activated a new panel, the system responded with more than cooperation. It responded like it had been waiting for him. There was no doubt left in his mind that his DNA was not just compatible, it was fundamental. These systems were locked to humanity's specific genetic markers, woven into the biocoding of the relic network, and the deeper he went, the more he realized Bailey's people had been wandering in the aftermath of a galactic experiment that never reached its final stage. This wasn't myth. This was unfinished programming. Kurt had always prided himself on spotting scams and religious cons a mile off, but what he saw here couldn't be dismissed. He hadn't just lit the spark by accident. He was the missing piece that activated dormant command pathways, each one pulsing with purpose. Whatever the original designers intended, it had never been completed until now. Bailey visited often, not to lecture or push more prophecy, but to observe. She watched him from the edges of the room, sometimes silent, sometimes questioning his discoveries. Their conversations became less guarded, more real. She admitted she didn't fully understand the relics, only the doctrine passed down through generations, doctrine built around glimpses and incomplete translations. Now, with Kurt unlocking deeper functions, her faith was being redefined in real time. Yet, her belief in the star's design hadn't wavered. She didn't need to understand every line of code to believe in its purpose. What fascinated Kurt was how she held on to that belief while standing beside someone who challenged everything she thought she knew. She wasn't blind, she just chose to see hope. One evening, when the relic chamber dimmed into its natural low-light phase, Kurt finally asked the question that had been gnawing at him. Why keep calling it prophecy when we both know it's tech? These aren't visions. They're systems, calculations, triggers. Bailey's response was quiet but firm. Because prophecy was the only language we had. It was the only way to carry forward fragments of truth without understanding them. Not every story begins as fact. But that doesn't mean the ending isn't real. He stared at her for a long moment, taking in the curve of her horns glowing faintly in the relic light, the way her first shimmered like distant nebulae. You realize this changes everything. The rituals, the bloodlines, even the council, they're built on mythology that's now unraveling in front of us. She didn't look shaken. Let them unravel. Let something stronger take its place. Kurt returned to the interface, navigating deeper into the relic systems. That was when he found it, an encrypted file buried behind a locked command tree. When he touched it, the interface pulsed red. It didn't reject him, but it hesitated as if testing his intent. He forced the code open and a new projection filled the air. It showed a star map of known sectors, each point linked by lines of luminous energy. The symbols translated roughly to activation protocol, and more chillingly, core fusion readiness. "Bailey," he said sharply. She approached without hesitation. He pointed, "This isn't about your people ascending. This is about the relics activating something galaxy-wide, a failsafe or a beacon or worse, a broadcast. Look at this. These are nodes. These are weapons." She studied the map, her jaw tightening. "No. Our texts said the relics would elevate our kind, restore us. They might," he said, "but not how you think. This system wasn't built for uplift. It was built for release. If I complete the sequence, it doesn't end with you and me. It triggers something old and massive. You were just step one." For the first time since he met her, Bailey looked uncertain. Her posture shifted, her fingers curling slightly at her sides. If this is true, then everything we believed was only a shadow. "Doesn't make it meaningless?" Kurt said, "but we need to find out what this system actually does before anyone rushes into fulfilling it." She nodded slowly, her voice quieter than usual. "Then we'll uncover it together, but not here. If the council finds out what you've accessed, they'll either worship you blindly or destroy you out of fear." Kurt didn't need more warning than that. He'd seen how rigid belief could shatter when exposed to truth. The last thing he wanted was to be paraded as a divine puppet, while a bunch of zealots argued over how best to use him or kill him. They needed time, space, and data. Fortunately, Bailey knew of a hidden vault buried in one of the monastery's sealed wings. It was said to house the oldest relic fragments, ones too dangerous or unstable to be studied openly. They moved under the cover of the next rest cycle, cloaks drawn and voices hushed. Bailey led with practiced stealth, navigating halls guarded by ceremonial sentries, more interested in tradition than actual threats. The sealed wing had been locked for decades, its glyphs dim and its air thick with age. Kurt bypassed the main seal with a single touch. Again, the relics responded to him like a long-lost master returning to claim his throne. Inside the vault, the air was colder. The relics here weren't just dormant, they were damaged, cracked from time or violence. Bailey moved carefully, reverently. "Some of these were brought from the earliest crash sites," she whispered. "They scared the elders, said they spoke of endings, not rebirth." Kurt activated one of the fragments. It flickered violently before stabilizing. The projection it displayed was short but unmistakable, a countdown partially frozen. The language was different, but the numbers were universal. This system had been waiting for a trigger, waiting for him. His chest tightened. Bailey, this isn't prophecy. It's a chain reaction, and I might have already started it. The vault sealed itself behind them, the relic door humming as the ancient energy locked back into place, cutting them off from the rest of the monastery. Kurt leaned against one of the cracked relic walls, breathing hard as the weight of what he'd seen settled into his bones. He wasn't just activating some forgotten artifact. He was unraveling a galactic tripwire buried in genetic code. The countdown on the fragment hovered in his mind like a sword above their heads, frozen for now, but not forever. Whatever system the ancients built had waited millennia for a human to come along and start the process, and that process had begun. He didn't know how far along it was, but he knew the system had recognized him, and he had no idea how to shut it down. Bailey stood across from him, arms folded, cloak flowing softly as it adjusted to the temperature of the chamber. Her silence was not the silence of shock, it was the stillness of someone calculating, someone measuring faith against evidence, and trying to see where the two could still align. "We were raised on stories of ascension," she said finally, voice steady but quieter than usual. "We trained for it, died for it. Every drop of blood that painted the altar was meant to guide us toward it. But what if it was never meant for us to rise? What if we were just a lock in you?" Her eyes flicked to him, glowing dim in the dark. "Are the key to something no one wanted to open." Kurt pushed off the wall, packing now, thinking aloud. "The relics you've worshipped, some were designed as memory holders, others as activation beacons. The entire monastery might be a housing structure for a communication array or worse, and that countdown, it's not some spiritual metaphor, it's operational, like a system stuck in standby mode until the final sequence is entered, and that sequence is tied to me." Bailey nodded once. "And now the council will want to see you as either savior or threat. Either way, they will act. If they find out what you've uncovered, they won't let you walk free." "I figured that much," Kurt muttered. "So we stay ahead of them, we find out what this system's endgame is before they do." Bailey tilted her head, "Then we begin the trial of incandescence." He stopped packing. "What now?" "It's an ancient rite," she explained. "Originally a test of purity of devotion, but the truth is, it's also the only way into the deep archive. The council keeps the full relic data hidden there, protected by hallucination fields. You want answers? You take the trial." "And I suppose you've already passed it?" he asked. She shook her head. "No one's passed it in generations. Most are driven mad or broken by the images. The relics show you what you fear, what you want, and what you hide. They strip you down until only truth remains." Kurt sighed, staring at the cracked relic still flickering with the frozen countdown. "Then strip me down. I need to know what we're dealing with." Bailey led him through a spiral corridor beneath the vault, walls narrowing as they descended. Each step down felt heavier, as though the very air conspired to crush doubt into his chest. The final chamber was circular, with a platform in the center and relic tendrils woven into the floor like metallic roots. Bailey motioned for him to stand on the platform, and as he stepped forward the room came alive with a low-pitched vibration. The relics pulsed once, then the world vanished. He was standing in a desert under twin suns, the heat baking his skin. Behind him the wreckage of the antler burned, and in front of him a line of bodies stretched to the horizon. Men and women he'd left behind, choices he hadn't made, lives he could have saved but hadn't. Then the scene shifted. He was in a cryo chamber, watching himself as a child being loaded into a stasis pod. He felt his mother's voice more than heard it, a faint echo of love and desperation before the doors sealed. Again the vision fractured. He stood on the altar in the monastery, Bailey kneeling before him, not in worship, but in pain, wounded, betrayed, calling his name as light erupted from her spine and ripped the stars apart. He staggered, his chest burned like molten lead. The relics were in his head now, pulling at everything buried, everything he refused to feel, his failures, his guilt, his fear that none of this had meaning beyond the accidental. Then a final vision came. He was old, gray, sitting beside Bailey beneath a shattered sky, her hand in his, her fur faded, her horns chipped, and both of them smiling. Then the world returned. He was back on the platform, sweat pouring down his face, heart pounding. Bailey stood at the edge of the chamber, arms tense, as if ready to leap in. "You survived," she said. "Barely," he muttered. "But I saw something. I saw a part of this I don't think I was supposed to see." He didn't say more. He wasn't sure she would believe it. That last vision of peace of a shared life felt more real than all the chaos. It wasn't doom, it wasn't prophecy, it was choice. Bailey guided him out, eyes fixed on him like she was trying to see through his skin. "The deep archive will open to you now. You passed, not as a follower, as a force." "I'm not here to lead your people," he said, voice flat. "No," she agreed. "You're here to change them." As they reached the corridor again, alarms began to echo through the halls, sharp, rhythmic pulses. Bailey's eyes narrowed. "The council knows something has shifted. They'll be watching." "Let them," Kurt said, teeth clenched. "We're done playing along with half-truths and chants. It's time to see what these relics are really hiding. And if that meant dragging an entire forgotten species into the truth kicking and screaming, so be it." The deep archive was buried in the lowest ring of the monastery, beneath layers of magnetic shielding and right-sealed architecture that hadn't been touched in generations. Bailey walked beside Kurt in silence, her cloak drawn tight around her shoulders as they passed through thresholds carved with languages lost to both of them. No guards stood watch, no sentries challenged their path. The trial had granted Kurt access no one could contest, not even the High Council. The relics had responded, and the relics were the final word in this place. Still, unease hung in the air like static. Bailey's posture was rigid, and her hand hovered near the hilt of the short ceremonial blade looped through her belt, not because she expected to use it against Kurt, but because she feared what they might uncover together. The archive doors opened without command. Two heavy slabs of pooling alloy retracted into the walls with a hiss of vented vapor, revealing a chamber unlike anything Kurt had seen before. The space was vast and circular, with tiered walkways descending into a central pit filled with rotating constructs of light and data. The relics here weren't passive. They moved, shifting in deliberate patterns, whispering sounds that resembled language but stayed just out of reach of comprehension. Kurt stepped forward slowly, his breath shallow as the structure responded to him. Runes brightened, platforms shifted. The archive had been asleep. Now it was awake. "Stay close," Bailey said, her voice barely above a murmur. "This place, it has a will of its own." "I'm getting that," Kurt replied, as a holographic lattice unfolded around him, scanning his body from head to toe with strands of glowing white. He didn't flinch. He was used to alien tech by now, but this wasn't just scanning. It was measuring him against something, matching him to a template he couldn't see. And as soon as the scan completed, a new section of the archive illuminated, vaulted walls covered in shifting data, maps of long-lost systems, files wrapped in encrypted memory webs. One particular panel pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He approached it, reached out, and the hologram reacted instantly. A projection flickered to life above them. It showed the universe as it once was, whole, pooling with life across countless star systems. Then came a fracture, an explosion of energy in a region of space long since marked uninhabitable, the origin of the Beastwoman's genetic seed. The timeline advanced, revealing what Kurt feared most, a design. Human DNA was the template. Alien physiology was the weaponized upgrade. The creators had fused them to craft soldiers, caretakers, biological interfaces, and eventually, entire species capable of acting as living control systems for galactic scale functions. Bailey stared at the projection in silence, her expression caught between awe and horror. "We were made to be tools." "And I was made to turn you on," Kurt muttered bitterly. "Not you, personally, the whole damn race." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she walked to the edge of the projection and studied a sequence of looping equations. These aren't just weapons, they're safeguards. Fail-safe systems meant to regulate something massive, a cosmic network, bioreactive infrastructure hidden in plain sight. We're standing on one node, but there are more. "I figured," Kurt said. "The countdown I triggered, it's not just local, it's broadcast. If this node activates, others might start coming online." Bailey turned to him. "And what happens when they all connect?" "I don't know, that's the problem. We're looking at a system left behind by a civilization advanced enough to reshape DNA across star systems and hide it in myths. I'm a cargo pilot, Bailey. I can read systems and patch code, but this," he gestured at the archive, "this is the deep end of the galaxy, and I'm treading water." "You're more than a pilot now," she said quietly. "Whether you asked for it or not." Kurt looked at her then, really looked. In the sterile white glow of the archive, her ceremonial cloak looked thinner, her eyes more vulnerable, but she stood as tall and steady as ever. Not because she was unafraid, but because she'd chosen not to let it break her. He admired that. Hell, he needed that. He stepped closer, letting the silence sit between them for a few seconds. "Tell me honestly, you still think this was fate?" Bailey didn't look away. "I think the stars scatter seeds in all directions. Sometimes they fall into chaos. Sometimes they grow into something stronger. I don't care if the relics chose you or if you fell here by accident. You're here now, and so am I." Something shifted in Kurt then, not just in his chest, but deep beneath the noise and pressure beneath the guilt and fear. A strange warmth he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, connection, not because of prophecy or programming, because of her. He reached out and touched her hand, her fingers curled against his, claws careful not to scratch. The moment was quiet, fragile, and powerful all at once, but it didn't last. A sharp alarm blared from the archive's center platform, the projection spinning out of control. Red glyphs flared across the walls. Bailey pulled away, moving fast toward the console. Someone's trying to access the outer ring. Unauthorized entry. "The Council?" Kurt asked, already moving beside her. "Maybe, or someone worse." She typed a sequence into the console, bypassing relic locks Kurt couldn't have cracked in hours. The display shifted, showing figures moving through a lower access corridor, armed, unmarked, not cult guards, mercenaries, pirates maybe. Someone tipped them off. "They're coming for the archive," Bailey said. "They'll want the relic data, or you maybe both." Kurt's jaw tightened. "Then we moved first." She grabbed a data rod from the base of the projection and slid it into a hidden slot beneath her spine cloak. "I've copied the core data, but we can't let them trigger a manual sequence. If they try to force it, this entire monastery could go up like a solar flare." Kurt nodded, pulling a shock pistol from a nearby relic cache, primitive by comparison to the tech around them, but good enough in a firefight. "Then we make our stand." Bailey met his gaze, together. He didn't hesitate, together. As they raced from the archive, side by side, relics flickering to life in their wake, Kurt knew this wasn't just about unlocking old systems anymore. It wasn't about prophecy or prophecy breakers. This was about stopping a chain reaction that should never have started, and maybe, if they survived the next few hours, they could find something real on the other side of it, something worth choosing. The first shots rang out before they even cleared the archive's threshold. Bailey reacted faster than Kurt could blink, slamming her shoulder into him and shoving them both against the wall, just as a plasma bolt scorched the air where his head had been. He hit the floor hard, breath knocked out of his lungs, and she was already crouched low, eyes glowing like wildfire, her clawed fingers drawing a pulse blade from beneath her cloak. He didn't need to ask where the enemy was. They were coming fast, boots hammering on the relic-tiled corridor, their shouts clipped in mechanical, mercenary dialects with no regard for the sacred halls they stormed. The Council hadn't sent them. This wasn't internal discipline. This was extraction. Hired guns with clear orders, retrieve the human, contain the priestess, and secure the relic data before anyone could shut it down. Kurt raised the shock pistol and waited for movement. The first merc that rounded the corner wore composite armor and a skull mask with a glowing visor, standard scavenger gear, but what marked him as a threat was the heavy disruptor rifle he carried. Before Kurt could pull the trigger, Bailey was already on the move. She surged forward, like a beast unchained cloak flaring behind her, blades slashing through armor like it was paper. The merc barely had time to scream before he collapsed in a heap of twitching limbs and shattered tech. Another followed, firing erratically, but Kurt planted his back against the opposite wall and returned fire, aiming low, catching the man in the leg. The bastard dropped gun clattering from his hand, and Bailey finished him without hesitation. "We need to fall back to the high chamber," she growled, wiping blood from her blade. "They'll try to cut off the access tunnels next." "Then let's move," Kurt said, checking the power cell on his pistol. "No idea how many there are, but they came for me. That means they think I'm the key." "You are," Bailey said without looking back, but not in the way they understand. They sprinted through the lower corridors, relic lights dimming behind them as security systems tried to reassert control. The monastery itself seemed to be reacting, not just to the attack but to Kurt's presence. Doors that had once been sealed opened on their own, pathways adjusted, reconfigured as though the very structure wanted him to escape. Bailey noticed it too. She gave him a sharp look as another vault-like wall retracted to reveal an unseen stairwell. "It's choosing you again." "Yeah," he muttered, "and I'm not sure that's a good thing." High chamber loomed ahead, an amphitheater-like space beneath the central spire, used only during ancient rituals and high ceremonies. Its domes stretched far above them, stars visible through transparent alloy that rippled with the energies of the dying star beyond. Bailey sealed the entrance behind them with a command room and placed the date a rod into the central altar. The relics immediately reacted, displaying maps, countdowns, and schematics that none of the invaders could hope to decipher without him. "They'll try to breach this room," Kurt said, walking to the altar and studying the data. "But they won't get the core code, not without me." Bailey stood beside him, eyes watching the walls like she expected them to shatter. "They don't care about prophecy. They don't want truth. They want control. Someone sold them information about you, your DNA, your activation. It's not just the council we have to worry about anymore." Kurt clenched his jaw. "Someone leaked it. Maybe one of your own. Maybe someone's scared of what you and I might change." "It doesn't matter," she said. "They made a mistake. They gave us the clarity we needed." He looked at her then, really looked. Her face was streaked with blood, but her eyes were steady. Despite everything, she wasn't shaken. She wasn't begging for answers from the stars anymore. She was standing in the chaos beside him, blade in hand, defiant. He reached for her hand without thinking. Her claws grazed his palm, but she didn't pull away. That touch wasn't part of any ritual. It wasn't about prophecy or biology. It was just two people choosing each other in the middle of madness. "They'll breach the door in minutes," she said, voice low. "I know. They'll kill you if they can't take you. I know that too. And yet you're still here." "I'm here because I want to be," he said, "and because I trust you." The moment stretched. The relics pulsed faintly, and the countdown that had been frozen in the archive blinked once, then stopped again. Whatever signal it had been waiting for, it hadn't arrived. But something had changed. "They'll come through the east side," Bailey said. "The wall is weakest there. We'll make our stand at the pillar line, narrow their angles." "Not a lot of cover," Kurt said, grabbing one of the relic spears mounted on the wall. It flared to life in his hands, humming softly. "We won't need cover," Bailey said, voice thick with certainty. "We fight as one." And they did. The mercs stormed in with all the precision of trained killers, but they were up against something they couldn't understand. Bailey moved like a force of nature, blending ancient combat rites with raw animal instinct. Kurt didn't fight like a soldier. He fought like a survivor, using relic weapons like tools, setting off localized magnetic pulses that dropped their enemies' comms and gear. They moved as a unit, back to back, covering each other without needing to speak. Bailey's blade painted the floor with sparks and blood, and Kurt's spear cracked armor with each swing, his reflexes sharpened by purpose he hadn't felt in years. They held the chamber. By the time the last merc dropped, the high dome was filled with smoke and silence. Bailey stood panting beside him, firm matted with sweat and streaked with grime, her veil torn. Kurt dropped the spear and leaned against the altar, every muscle aching. "You all right?" he asked. She turned to him, a small smile breaking across her face for the first time. "You fight well for a man born under no stars, and you're not half bad for a prophecy-obsessed cultist." She stepped close. "I'm not a cultist anymore." "No," he said softly. "You're more than that." He kissed her. There was no ceremony, no relic pulse, just a man and a woman scarred by fate and choice, finding something real in the middle of chaos. When they finally pulled apart, the countdown on the altar flickered again. Still paused, still waiting, but not for much longer. Bailey hadn't spoken much since the final merc fell, and Kurt didn't push her to. The high chamber had gone quiet except for the low hum of relic energy flowing back into its systems, slowly stabilizing now that the threat had been eliminated. Smoke drifted near the vaulted ceiling where weapon discharge had scorched ancient symbols, and the last of the mercenaries' bodies lay sprawled across the polished obsidian floor, already being absorbed into the monastery's purification process. Biotech tendrils curling around armor and dragging remains away like roots reclaiming lost nutrients. It was a place designed not just to preserve knowledge, but to eliminate risk. Kurt leaned on the altar, watching the blinking data runes across the relic's surface. The same countdown digits suspended in stasis like a breath held too long. His body ached from the fight, and his knuckles were bruised from where his grip had cracked against that relic's spear. But all of that was background noise. The real weight was in what Bailey had whispered after the kiss, barely audible voice hoarse with exhaustion and something deeper. "I felt it," she'd said, "the moment it changed, not the relic's me." Now, as she stood across from him, stripped of her ceremonial veil and most of the armor that had survived the fight, she looked less like a warrior priestess and more like a person caught between what she'd been taught and what she now believed. Her halo-shaped horns glinted faintly in the rising light, and her fur, matted and scorched in places, still shimmered in patches with the midnight purple hue that had first caught his eye. He had thought he was crashing into madness when he landed here. Now, madness felt more like the idea of leaving. "You haven't looked at the altar since," Kurt said, breaking the silence, nodding to the relic console still pulsing behind him. Bailey didn't move, because I'm afraid. He didn't laugh at her, he didn't joke, didn't tease, he just waited. She walked slowly to the altar and placed her hand on its surface. The console flared in response, not in defense or aggression, but recognition, and it didn't stop there. A secondary sequence activated, displaying a new pattern, overlapping DNA spirals slowly entwining. Kurt moved to stand beside her. His own hand reached out, almost unconsciously, and the relic's pulse brighter as his fingers brushed the outer ring of the projection. The strands twisted together into a shape that was unmistakable, a gestation sequence. He stepped back. "Bailey." "I know," she said, her voice barely more than breath. "I felt it when we fused. It wasn't just heat or emotion. It was the code responding, my body responding." Kurt stared at the rotating model, the way the strands moved in sync, how the relics displayed the hybrid markers with no errors. It wasn't just compatible, it was perfect. The system had accepted the union not as an accident, but as fulfillment. "You're pregnant," he said flatly, not out of panic but because saying it made it real. Bailey nodded. "The child isn't just a child, it's part of the final phase. The spark and the vessel weren't meant to stand alone, they were meant to create something new." He let out a long breath, running a hand down his face. He didn't know what he'd expected when they'd kissed, when they'd collapsed into each other during that moment of stillness, but it hadn't been this. He wasn't angry, wasn't scared in the traditional sense. He was overwhelmed by the scope of it, by how fast things were moving, by how deep he'd already gone. But when he looked at Bailey again, at the steady strength in her face, at the wild clarity in her eyes, he didn't feel regret. He felt grounded. "Does it change how you feel?" she asked, reading his silence like an open book. He shook his head. "Only makes it more real. I don't know what kind of life this kid's going to have if the countdown hits 0 and the galaxy lights up with whatever signal this system sends, but I'm not walking away." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, a tension she hadn't acknowledged until now bleeding out of her body. "I don't want prophecy anymore. I want something we build together, whether that's raising this child or tearing down the system that would turn it into another tool." Kurt moved to her side, resting his forehead against hers, the curve of her horns gently framing his head. "Then that's what we do. We finish this on our terms." The altar shifted again, now showing a map of all the remaining nodes in the network, dozens of sites across uninhabited systems, all dormant, all waiting. The child, according to the data, would be the only living being capable of interfacing with the central core once born. Kurt stared at that reality, knowing what it meant. If they didn't stop the countdown or redirect its purpose before the child's birth, it would be the galaxy's next fulcrum, its freedom or its control. "We need to break the relay chain," he said. "If we sever the transmission pathway from this node, we buy time to figure out how to reprogram the sequence." Bailey nodded. "The central relay is buried beneath the monastery's foundation. Only the High Council has ever accessed it. Then we go through them." She looked at him, head tilted slightly. "You'd take on the Council for me? For you, for our child, for every species out there that doesn't know this sleeping system could rewrite their fate overnight. I didn't choose to be the spark, but I can choose to burn down the fuse before it reaches the core." Bailey gave a sharp, approving grin. "Then let's burn it together." The moment passed, replaced by motion. They moved quickly, preparing gear, accessing sealed pathways Bailey had only heard about in prayer songs and forbidden texts. The monasteries seemed to resist their path now, security protocols flickering awake. The relics could feel the system straining, could sense the tension between its original purpose and the new variables it had never anticipated, variables like love, like defiance, like a child not born of programming but of trust. As they descended into the lower rings, deeper than either of them had gone before, Kurt tightened the strap on his shock blade and checked his tools. Bailey walked ahead, one hand resting on the curve of her stomach as if already protecting what came next. The relics dimmed as they passed, not in warning, but in recognition. They were no longer the spark and the vessel. They were a new beginning, and the galaxy was not ready for what they would become. The descent into the monastery's foundation was unlike anything Kurt had seen since arriving. The upper halls were crafted with ceremonial precision, vaulted ceilings, polished stone, luminous relic veins threading across the walls. But here, in the belly of the structure, form gave way to function. The architecture became harsh, industrial, like someone had buried the truth beneath layers of devotion. Pipes hummed with a low-frequency resonance, walls pulsed with raw power, and the floor panels vibrated under their boots as if the entire place was alive and growing restless. Bailey moved ahead with grim focus, her spine cloak flicking behind her like a trailing comet, guiding them through winding corridors long sealed from the rest of the Order. Only high initiates of the Council had ever come this far, and even then, only by right and blood. Now they moved without permission, and the deeper they went, the more the relics pushed back. Doors that required both their signatures, floors that shimmered dangerously before stabilizing under their steps, relic whispers filtering into the air like static-laced warnings. They reached the first inner gate, a massive circular seal embedded in the wall glowing faintly with crimson glyphs. Bailey stepped forward and placed her hand on the outer ring. It hissed and pulsed, scanning her presence. When Kurt moved beside her and added his hand, the seal shifted immediately. The glyphs reversed, flickered, then folded into one unified pulse. The door unsealed with the grinding weight of centuries, revealing a descent of narrow steps carved from obsidian alloy and lined with luminous conduits that stretched deep into the unknown. There was no sound beyond the hum of power in their own breaths. "This is where the relay node anchors," Bailey said, voice low, her hand brushing her stomach unconsciously. "My people always believed it was a holy root, the base of the monastery's divine structure, but it's just a transmission core." Kurt nodded, studying the schematic projected across his wristband. "If we can sever or scramble the carrier signal from this node, we stall the full system activation. It won't stop the countdown across the galaxy, but it'll prevent the final sequence from executing once the last piece, our child, is born. And if we fail, then everything we've done ends with the galaxy falling under control of a system no one understands. Entire species rewritten before they realize what's happening." Bailey's expression tightened. "Then we won't fail." They descended, passing under what looked like a ribcage of pulsating energy. Here, the relics were different, raw, less decorative, more mechanical in function. Massive columns of data rotated in 3 dimensions above deep power wells, and sigils hovered in midair, warping as they sensed Kurt's proximity. This place had no priestesses, no chants, no doctrine. It was ancient code, dormant engineering designed by something long gone but still watching through its mechanisms. At the base of the stairwell stood a massive interface node, 12 feet high, covered in relic filaments, and surrounded by glowing pylons that floated silently, orbiting the structure like a heartbeat frozen in motion. "This is it," Kurt said, moving to the control point. "The main relay. If we disconnect it without triggering fail-safes, we kill the system's ability to broadcast the fusion completion signal, but we can't just rip it apart. We have to outcode it." "I can hold the system's spiritual logic gates open," Bailey said, already removing the bone-etched bands from her wrists. "They're not just symbolic. They link directly to subroutines meant to verify divine protocol." He looked at her surprised. "You knew they were interfaces." "No," she said, smiling faintly. "I suspected, but I didn't need confirmation until now." She moved to opposite ends of the node, linking her bands to 2 suspended pylon anchors. The relics responded with immediate intensity. Energy cracked through the space between them, forming a bridge of light laced with thousands of flickering characters. Kurt took a breath, stepped into the center, and jacked into the command port with his wristband. The data hit him like a tidal wave, too fast, too loud, too deep. The code wasn't linear. It wasn't human-readable. It felt alive, evolving in real time, countering every attempt to override it with layers of obfuscation designed by a species who had expected no one would dare rewrite their endgame. He gritted his teeth, forced his mind to focus. He wasn't here to destroy the system, just blind it, redirect the signal with a false endpoint, scramble the key values that identified their child as the sequence's final cipher. Every line he altered, the system pushed back, rerouting logic, repairing pathways, questioning his inputs with pulses that translated to, "Are you authorized? And is this the chosen outcome?" He forced them all into loops, made the relics question themselves. He gave them answers they couldn't verify, contradictions they had no protocol for. And through it all, Bailey held the gate wide, face taut with strain, her body rigid with effort, as the spiritual locks fought her, relic filaments crawling over her arms like vines trying to reclaim their source. Then the system wavered. The countdown paused. A new signal branched. Kurt kied in the last override, replacing the child's DNA marker with a recursive ghost ID that would reroute any command-seeking completion. The moment he hit execute, the node flared white-hot, then collapsed into silence. The pylons froze, the glyphs dimmed, the room went still. Bailey collapsed to one knee, panting, sweat pouring down her fur. Kurt rushed to her, grabbing her shoulder and steadying her. "You with me?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, but I felt it fight me. It didn't want to let go." "Because we just broke a system that thought it was a god," he said, "but we bought time. That's all we needed." They rose together, but as they moved toward the stairwell, a new vibration rippled through the structure. Not mechanical, not from the relics, something else, distant footsteps, a familiar pattern. The council had arrived. Kurt cursed under his breath. "Of course we shut down their god machine and now they're coming to punish us for blasphemy." Bailey turned to him, eyes hard. "Then we speak to them, not as rebels, as truth-bearers." "They're not going to listen." "Maybe not," she said, "but they'll listen to me if I make them." Kurt didn't ask what she meant. He just followed her up the steps back toward confrontation, toward judgment. But now they held the truth, and the future growing inside her wasn't a relic's prophecy anymore. It was theirs, and they'd fight for it. The council was waiting in the Hall of Echoes by the time Kurt and Bailey emerged from the lower levels, the air thick with the sharp scent of incense and the tension of old power grown brittle from years of comfort. The hall was nothing like the archive or the sacred chambers he'd seen before. It was stark, utilitarian, a space of confrontation rather than communion. The relic walls loomed high above, lined with memory plates and ancestral etchings glowing faintly beneath thick layers of dust. 7 robed figures stood in a half-circle on the elevated platform at the far end, their ceremonial armor polished to a shine that looked more decorative than practical. They didn't greet Bailey. They didn't acknowledge Kurt. Instead, they spoke in unison, voices trained to blend, their tone echoing with authority long since unearned. "You defiled the lower sanctum. You interfered with the relay. You broke the line of succession. Step forward, Priestess Bailey of the Veiled Star, and answer for your actions." Bailey didn't flinch. She stepped forward with shoulders square and spine tall, her cloak trailing behind her like the wake of a ship slicing through still water. Kurt stood just behind her, silent but watchful, his hand resting near the relic blade clipped to his belt. He didn't expect a fight here, but if one came, he'd rather bleed next to Bailey than let her stand alone. "I acted in accordance with what the relics revealed," she said, her voice steady. "Not the myths you clung to, not the parables you twisted to keep control. The spark has arrived. The vessel was chosen, but the system you worship is no god. It is a machine we've disabled to protect not just ourselves, but all those across the stars who would have suffered under its completion." One of the elders stepped forward, his horns gilded with ceremonial metal, his jaw set like stone. "You presume to understand what has been safeguarded for millennia." "I understand it better than you," Kurt said, stepping up beside her now. "Because I read the code myself. I triggered it. I saw how it operated, not by divine will but by design. You weren't preparing for ascension. You were maintaining a failsafe built by a long-dead civilization, and you were going to sacrifice the future to fulfill a past you never understood." The council's murmur rose like wind in a broken cathedral. Another elder stepped forward, this one with a voice like a rusted blade. "And what future do you think you've secured by disabling the signal? What right do you have to alter a system that predates your species? First breath." Kurt didn't back down. "The right of anyone who refuses to be used as a cog in a dead empire's machine. You built your faith around fragments of instruction manuals, were the first ones to actually finish reading them." The room pulsed faintly, relics reacting to the tension, to the presence of the activated spark, and the rejected command sequence now drifting through disabled pathways. Bailey moved in front of Kurt again, her eyes locked on the council. "There is something else you haven't accounted for. The system was built for a singular outcome, the fusion of human and vessel to produce a key. That outcome has already begun." She rested a hand on her stomach and the chamber fell silent. One of the elders stepped back, visibly shaken, another's lips pulled tight in disbelief. "You're claiming the ritual was completed?" "No ritual," Bailey said. "No altar, no audience, just us, and the relics accepted it. We triggered the last layer without even knowing. That's how close we came to unlocking something none of you were prepared for." Kurt saw the realization settling over them. Not belief, not acceptance, fear, because now they couldn't control it. Now they couldn't manipulate it, interpret it, or filter it through a hierarchy they'd constructed like a scaffold around a lie. The relics had already chosen, and it hadn't involved the council. "The child is not a prophecy," Bailey said, her voice sharper now. "She is not a vessel to be shaped by doctrine or raised in shadow. She is ours, and we will not let you or the system you cling to define what she becomes." The elder with the metal-tipped horn stepped forward again. Then you leave us no choice. You have removed yourselves from the sacred path. You are anathema now. You are not welcome in this place. Bailey didn't blink. We were never welcome. We were tolerated, used. Now, we are leaving. Kurt turned with her, but before they could exit the hall, the central relic overhead shifted. A vast column of light poured down, not violent, not judgmental, just bright. The room fell completely still. The council froze. Even Bailey's stride slowed. The relics weren't attacking. They were acknowledging. The beam spread, and in its heart a new glyph formed, one that hadn't been seen before. Bailey reached for it, and it floated into her hand, weightless and warm. When Kurt looked closer, it wasn't a glyph at all. It was a seed, a crystallized lattice of energy and code, shaped like a teardrop suspended in time. "What is it?" he asked. "A choice," Bailey said, holding it between her fingers. "Not a command, not a demand, just a choice." She turned back to the council, voice steady. "You called us heretics. You tried to use belief as a cage, but the relics have moved beyond you. They offer this to us freely, and we will decide what comes next." Then she turned and walked out of the Hall of Echoes, Kurt beside her, leaving the council staring at the fatting beam of light and the truth they could no longer deny. They didn't run. They didn't hide. They walked with purpose through the winding halls of a monastery that no longer held their future. The relics dimmed behind them. Doors opened ahead of them. The air no longer whispered in warning. It simply moved with them. As they reached the outer landing platform where Kurt's patched-up shuttle now stood waiting, silent, crude, but theirs, Bailey looked out at the stars. Her hand remained on her belly, the seed still pools in faintly in her grip. "We did it," Kurt said, watching her carefully. She nodded. "For now, the countdown may be paused, but it isn't erased. The galaxy still holds its breath." "Then we keep moving," he said. "We raise her in the light, and when the universe comes knocking again, we'll be ready." Bailey smiled sharp, radiant, real. Together, and the stars beyond them, ancient and waiting, began to shimmer like they, too, had chosen something new. Kurt didn't know what peace would look like when it finally found him. But when it came, it looked nothing like the freedom-choked dreams he used to chase in the back end of smuggling ships or the half-dead silences of hangars after a deal gone wrong. Peace came softly, steadily, through the quiet rhythm of new mornings on a planet no map remembered. It came with the sound of Bailey's voice echoing off stone as she hummed while repairing solar arrays. It came with the warm weight of her hand pressed to his chest in sleep and the growing flutter of motion inside her that reminded him daily just how much had changed. The system they had disabled hadn't reawakened. The relics had not come to claim them. No signal burst through the void. Instead, there was calm, as though the machine had recognized a kind of surrender. It hadn't been programmed to predict and accepted it. Their settlement, if it could even be called that, was simple. A converted shelter built into the rocks near a mineral-rich ridge, reinforced by leftover alloy plating from Kurt's half-disassembled shuttle. The climate was stable, the atmosphere breathable, and the stars above were untouched by traffic lanes or trade beacons. He rigged a small weather scanner and signaled dampener to keep them off-grid, and every night he checked it out of habit, even though he no longer expected alarms. Bailey handled everything else with a strength and calm he still couldn't quite understand, no matter how many times he woke beside her. She had shed her titles, her priestess name, her ceremonial blades, but not her purpose. That remained. She protected what mattered. She nurtured the life growing inside her, and she chose him every day not out of prophecy, but because she wanted to. The seed relic they had taken from the monastery sat embedded in a small shrine Bailey had built from stones and old transmitter shells. It no longer pulsed with urgency. Instead, it radiated a soft light like a distant ember, as if the machine inside had gone dormant. Kurt had studied it for weeks before giving up. He couldn't crack its layers, and after a while he stopped trying. It was no longer a threat, it was a memory, a reminder of the path they'd turned away from, of the system they'd broken not by brute force, but by choosing to live outside its rules. He sat on the slope overlooking the valley one evening, legs stretched out, palms resting on dry soil warmed by two suns. Bailey moved quietly beside him, dropping down into the grass with a soft grunt. She had grown heavier, her pregnancy visible now in the curve of her belly, the way she moved a little slower than before. But she was radiant. Her fur caught the last golden threads of sunset, and her eyes, those fierce glowing orbs, softened when she looked at him. "How's the pain?" he asked, voice low. "It's not pain," she said with a smirk. "It's pressure and hunger. She kicks when I don't eat enough, just like you complain when the rations are bland." He chuckled and leaned over to kiss her cheek. "Then I'll cook something decent tonight." "Please don't," she said dryly. "I'd rather chew old wiring." That earned a laugh. He tried learning her tribe's recipes and mostly failed. She still praised his efforts, but her honesty had become sharper the longer they lived without titles or ceremony. She no longer had to impress anyone. Neither did he. "I've been thinking about her name," Bailey said after a while, her voice quieter. Kurt turned to her. "Yeah, I want something new. Something that doesn't belong to relics or legends, not a name from the monastery, not one from your history either. Something we give her without any weight, just meaning." He nodded slowly. "I like that. No echoes just now." They sat in silence for a moment longer, watching the stars begin to bloom overhead. There were no temples out here, no altars, no chanting voices trying to make sense of the galaxy through ancient songs, just two people breathing, surviving, loving. Bailey leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think we should have stayed and rebuilt it all, the monastery, the relic network, maybe even rewired the system to something better?" Kurt thought about it, then shook his head. "We didn't need to fix their world. We needed to leave it behind. You said it yourself, our daughter isn't a prophecy. She's not their vessel, she's ours, and if the galaxy can't handle that, then it'll just have to adjust." Bailey smiled. "She's going to be a stubborn little thing." "She doesn't stand a chance otherwise," he said. "Look who her mother is." Bailey nudged him with her elbow, then rested her hand over his. He looked down at their fingers, his pale, scarred ones, hers thick and tipped with claws, imperfect, incompatible by most standards, and yet nothing had ever felt more right. Later that night they lay in the warmth of their small shelter, wrapped in old blankets and each other. The winds whispered outside, brushing across the shielding in soft, rhythmic waves. The stars glowed through the viewport above them, unfamiliar and uncaring. Kurt traced small circles on Bailey's side as she drifted toward sleep. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been this still, not just physically but inside. "We should name her in the morning," Bailey murmured. "We will," he said, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. "And then we build," he whispered. "Not a prophecy, not a legacy, just a life." She smiled without opening her eyes. Good. And that was the end of it, not with the relics reawakening, not with war or galactic chaos, but with peace, real peace, the kind not found in predictions or machines, the kind that only comes when two people choose to walk away from what they were told they were meant to be and instead become something better, something entirely their own, and they never looked back.